You want to hear my speech?
Can you skip it since you're 20 minutes late?
You got something important to do, Rich? Okay. Because you've all been so nice, I'll suspend the opening remarks, just take your questions. So what's your first question?
For starters, I want to know what the House is thinking about the measure that yesterday passed the Senate, this property tax, education funding, CPS, what do you call it? And what is your reaction to it?
We're going to set that for hearing before House committees, and that will happen not this week, maybe next week. But the plan in the House is to take that before committee.
But do you think it's a good idea to try to keep those federal dollars flowing?
Oh,
Are we talking about two different issues?
yeah. I care about both though, so, but to expand on that, so the House is going to take it up, do you support that, or I know previously you've made
Which bill are we
statements.
talking about?
So the property tax, CPS gets pension money,
Sure,
and your
sure.
education funding.
Right,
formula.
right. We want to take an opportunity to learn more about the bill, all right? So you know it's a multifaceted bill, and there's a lot in there, and so we think we need a little time to completely understand the impact of the bill.
Previously, though, you've been opposed to this idea of the state picking up more in pension costs, and this bill would do that.
Well, you understand that there's a difference here between Chicago and the rest of the state. And yes, in the past, I've argued that local districts outside of Chicago ought to end the free lunch, and that they ought to pay the employer share of the pension cost for the teachers. They do that today for the non-teachers in IMRF. But in TRS, the state picks up the employer share of the cost for the teacher's pension. And I've argued that we ought to end that, just as a governmental policy, because it's a situation where decisions are made locally, but the bill is paid for through the state TRS. We ought to move in a different direction. Chicago is completely different. In Chicago, the employer pays their own share, and in Chicago, they pick up some of the teachers' share of the pension also. So it's understandable that there are people in Chicago, like the mayor, who have argued that if the state is picking up the employer share for teachers outside of Chicago, they ought to do the same thing in Chicago. That's the mayor's argument. It's very understandable. It's very logical. So that's why we'd like to get a little time to study the bill and to learn more about it.
The governor said today that he doesn't like the bill because it shouldn't be a special deal for Chicago, but it also doesn't give local control on things like collective bargaining and.
Well, we know that's his standard position, that he wants to, in effect, repeal collective bargaining for local governments and local school districts. And here is where the governor's advocacy of that position bumps up against core beliefs of both Democrats and Republicans, because people generally feel that repealing collective bargaining lowers wages and lowers the standard of living for middle-class families.
I know you said you studied the bill, but in the meantime, is there something that you think can be done to help CPS with that pension cost that they're looking for some relief on?
Well, if there's an agreement here in the legislature, and that would include the governor, where people could come together and recognize that the Chicago school system is different than most systems in the state. So as an example, I think you know that the free and reduced lunch program nationwide is a barometer of poverty in school systems. It's very well accepted that the free and reduced lunch program participation would indicate whether a school system is serving poor children. In the case of Chicago, 86% of the students in the Chicago system are on the free and reduced lunch program. 84.9% of the students in the Chicago system are minority. 39.3% African American and 45.6% Hispanic. And of the total student population in Chicago, 16.6% are English learners. So Chicago is clearly a system different than other systems in the state. And in my view, because of that, because of the number of poor children attending schools in Chicago, 86%, the Chicago system should get some different consideration, some special consideration. I would be prepared to work to get that done.
What might that look like?
Well, again, if people have open minds, if they resolve that a system that has 86% poor children deserves some special consideration, then we can get the job done.
By people, you mean the governor?
Anybody in the building, including Rich Miller. Would you at least look awake?
I was out a little late last night. Have you, did you get your research to go back further than 2011 on workers' comp yet?
No.
Did
No.
you?
My position on workers' comp has been stated, I thought, very well. The key point is causation. And I read a document this morning, it may have been your publication this morning, where, did you say in your publication that the governor's position would be that if the worker is more than 50% responsible, then,
They don't qualify.
okay. Well, Rich, that runs directly against the concept of a no-fault system.
I got it. That's not what I'm asking.
Well, I'm trying to just speak to you generally about the issue. You know that workers' compensation is a trade-off. I mean, the worker loses the ability to file a normal lawsuit in the circuit court. And what they get in exchange is a no-fault system where there's a restriction on the amount of recovery. But if you go into that system and you say, okay, it's a no-fault system, and therefore you lose your ability to go into the circuit court, but if you're more than 50% liable, you've negated the concept of the no-fault system. Again, if people want to be reasonable and do changes in workers' compensation, they can be done. The House has passed a bill that does changes in workers' compensation. The Senate has passed a bill that does the same thing. I've already spoken with Representative Hoffman, who's the chairman of the House Labor Committee, and I asked him to take both bills and to see if he could reconcile the differences between the bills and give us a meaningful workers' compensation bill.
Nothing else besides what's in those two bills?
He can, the reconciliation can go beyond what's in both bills.
You were asked earlier about the federal funds bill that passed the Senate.
Yeah, right.
Do you believe it's important to continue to have that money flowing if it's available?
The Senate passed the bill yesterday. We've received several requests from recipients of federal funds, state agencies, and even the governor's office for additions to the bill. And so our plan is to set that bill for hearing on Monday and be in a position to accept additional requests for inclusion in the bill.
Set it for, schedule it on Monday for a later time or schedule it?
Committee hearing on Monday. The bill's in a position to be called next week.
Do you support the general idea of it to try to get these pass-through funds moving?
Here again, we want to provide an opportunity for others who may wish to join the bill and also to take some time to come to a judgment as to how far we should go with this.
Did you have any role at all in Mayor Emanuel's hiring of Eileen Mitchell?
No,
What do you think of the hiring?
I don't have any opinion.
None?
No, I don't, you know, the mayor's entitled to hire who he wants to hire. And he doesn't need my opinion.
Should the Democrats have a celebratory day at the state fair, given the situation with the budget? Not
You know,
suggesting that you be ascetics and give yourselves to death, but is it the kind of thing that should be, you know,
we're confidently looking forward to November of 16. We think that it'll be a good democratic election.
Do you think there'll be a budget by the state fair?
You know, if everybody's reasonable, and if everybody functions in moderation and not in the extreme, and since we're in continuous session, you know we're in continuous session.
I do.
All right.
Are you taking the opportunity while you're in continuous session to meet with Governor Rauner, or and what have you two spoken about?
We haven't met recently, but we do meet, and I'm sure we'll meet in the future. And when we meet, why, you know, we talk about all of these issues that we're discussing today.
Yeah, lawmakers I spoke to yesterday in the Senate say they feel it's unusual that there hasn't been as much communication between the leaders so far this summer. Do you agree with that, that there's been not a lot of productive talks this summer so far?
Oh, I think there's been some productivity. You know, it may not be what everybody wants, but I think that at a minimum, the members of the legislature are being given the opportunity to fully understand these issues, workers' compensation for one, and then others. I think that's productive. I think that the more the members of the legislature understand the issue, the better job they'll do.
In your experience with you've been here for a while, when this started at the end of May, did you think we were gonna be here in August without a budget? This expected?
I expected that there would be a long, protracted discussion among the governor and everybody in the legislature. I'm not surprised.
I'm sorry, Speaker, as for the state fair, you don't anticipate any need to change anything about the Democrats' Day. Go ahead.
I expect that the Republicans will be out there for Republican Day, and I expect the Democrats will be there for Democratic Day.
You said that, you know, you had expected this, that you're not surprised that there's been this protracted discussion. So what is the strategy for getting out of it? We've had committee holds, we've
Yeah,
had,
yeah.
you know,
The st-
continuous session,
sure,
return.
yeah,
What's
yeah.
the strategy
The
for an
the
end?
strategy is for everybody to be reasonable and to function in moderation and not in the extreme, because we're in continuous session.
And how do you get somebody to move to that point of reasonableness? I mean, what's going to change that hasn't happened thus far?
Again, there are discussions, you know, there are exchanges of information, and to the extent that people are reasonable, they'll see that they ought to move in a certain direction rather than what they're doing today. That's what's needed.
If there's,
Mr. Speaker, is there enough support for an override of the governor's veto of the labor negotiation bill?
The answer is yes.
Have you asked the
Do you
Senate
plan
To
to
call
delay?
that for an override?
Why would I not call it?
Just asking.
Okay.
Have you asked the Senate to delay action on it so you can wait for all your members to get back here?
No.
Do you have any comment on the turnaround in Illinois mailer that went into Frank Montino's district while he was either in surgery or recently recovering from it?
Well, the comment I would make about mailers would relate to these mailers that came into my district. I'm sure you've seen them. So these were mailers that came into my district, and the point I would make is that the message is remarkably similar to Governor Rauner's message. So the language and the tone and the message is all remarkably similar to Governor Rauner, and this was done by Greg Goldner,
In your district?
my district, sure.
Give me a copy.
I don't know. If you continue to look, if you continue to look, boy, place has been very sad since you left. They're waiting for you to return. So again, these mailers are similar to mailers that were done throughout the city of Chicago. They were done by Greg Goldner, and the language and the tone and the message is remarkably similar to everything that comes out of the governor and the governor's office.
So what does that mean to you? What does that signify?
It means that you, as a good reporter, ought to go and chase after all that.
Does that, I don't know, change the culture in Springfield, or isn't this the sort of thing that Democrats have long done, you sending mailers out all the time, right?
It's not going to change my thinking, it's not going to change what I do, and I don't think it's going to change the thinking of the people in my district. But the point is that, in my judgment, these two people have come together.
Have you received any phone calls generated by that mailer?
Not that I've been told. Not that I've been told.
Representative Bradley continues to pursue the idea of offshored, so to speak, salaries in the governor's office. What is your opinion of this idea of paying people who do work for the governor out of other agencies?
It's violative of the governor's repeated promise of transparency in government. This is one of the things that he complained about as a candidate. It's one of the things that he complained about in his inaugural remarks. And it's easy enough for the governor to come in before the legislature and to say, I'd like to increase the size of the appropriation in the governor's office because I want to hire people that I think are qualified, and I'd like to pay them an appropriate salary. I mean, there's no need to, as Mr. Bradley would say, there's no need to offshore people. Just come in before the legislature and argue on behalf of your level of appropriation.
So, on the note, back to the 1229, the ASME union, the union bill, when would you potentially call that, if you think you've got the votes?
Well, first, it's got to come from the Senate. It's a Senate bill. It'll start in the Senate, and we'll wait for Senate action. I presume they'll override. Then when it gets to the House, we'll assess what would be a good day to call for the vote. I'd like to make the point on the arbitration bill because I was advised that the governor today was arguing against the arbitration bill. And the point I'd like to make is that the bill is almost identical to the statute today that relates to local police and fire all over the state of Illinois. So in 1983, when we adopted the collective bargaining statute, we provided for the local police and fire that rather than have the right to strike, they'd go into arbitration. And that's the same concept that's being advanced here in this particular bill. So it would be helpful when you see the governor, you might want to explain that to him.
What do you make of the governor's comments that he says he doesn't plan to lock out workers, therefore they shouldn't be this bill?
It seems to me that that's a matter for the bargaining that's going on between the governor and AFSCME and others right now. That's one of the governor's options in bargaining. So it's between he and the unions.
The governor's handing out pink slips to 171 state employees by the end of September. Is this going to increase the pressure to get a budget put together so more people don't lose jobs?
Why is he laying people off?
He claims that there's not money. That's how he's going to manage the lack of a budget.
I see. Will that apply to those high-priced consultants that he's offshoring?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
So how do you convince someone to move to moderation if they feel that they are in moderation, that they aren't being extreme, that they're being
Yeah.
perfectly reasonable, and
Yeah.
maybe they're not used to people telling them no?
I think it's important that you spend time interacting. That's what's really very helpful. That's what I try to do because I have certain opinions, and I've learned over the years that when I listen to other people's opinions, sometimes I change my own, just because of the new knowledge that I've gotten from the conversation. And so if everybody does the same thing, it would be very helpful to the process.
Can I go back real quick to the CPS bill, Congressman's bill? Were you saying that you're now open to giving the city some employer share pension pickup? Cash, 200 million or whatever is what he's got in his bill?
We want to take some time and study the bill. What I said is that I can understand the logic of the mayor's position, that if the state is paying for the employer's costs of the teacher's pension obligation outside of Chicago, that they should do it in Chicago. I understand his logic, and I think that he ought to have his opportunity to advocate that. We'll get into the bill and we'll get a better understanding of the bill.
How long can these social service agencies that are, I mean, much of the money is already going out in the state budget, or GRF at least, through these court orders and through the governor signing this education law. So how long can these social service agencies last? Or do you need to try another temporary budget again? Or kind of, what gives along that pressure point?
Well, we're prepared to work with all recipients of state money, if it's appropriate, to provide an appropriation for their continued operation. We're not going to pick and choose, we're not going to discriminate. If they're worthy, why, we think that they ought to be able to continue to provide the service that they've been providing. Let me say again that the legislature sent a spending plan to the governor that helped and protected middle-class families by supporting social service agencies. The governor was fully advised as to his options under the Constitution to work with that plan and to use the line item veto and the reduction veto to fashion the budget the way he would want it. He chose not to do that. He chose to do an outright veto, which is why we don't have spending authority for those agencies today. But we stand ready to work through the appropriations process to help those agencies.
Considering the programs that are at risk, the people who say they're suffering due to this budget issue, when you guys go to the Democrats Day, do you feel you'll be warmly welcomed that day if there's no budget?
Will we be warmly welcomed by the Republicans?
No. By people who go to the state fair, if there's no budget, do you feel that you're going to get a warm welcome on that day in the state fair?
I have no idea. I have no idea. If they're state workers and they're not getting their paycheck, they may not be happy, but state workers are getting their paycheck.
I think we're,
Rich looks like he's got more questions.
no, I think we're, I'm trying to stay awake.
No, I just texted Kuzno, copy that. Unless you want to do it somewhere else.
Other than your office.
You should get it from Will. All right, everybody, have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.